Inner Light Show. It's time to stop just surviving, and it's time to begin to thrive. It's time to live happier and healthier. Turn stress into strength. Noted author Debbie Mandel will show you how to move beyond personal doubts and fears and into positive perception to turn on your inner light. Here's your host, Debbie Mandel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my show. Our guest expert is Devra Davis, Ph.D., MPH, award-winning president of Environmental Health Trust. She lectures around the world on environmental health issues and is the author of Disconnect. Learn the truth about cell phone radiation and what you can do about it. Welcome, Devra.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
Now, why are cell phones sinister? And I choose the word sinister because it masks something.
Well, cell phones have revolutionized our lives, but the sinister component is that most of us are not aware that a cell phone is a two-way microwave radio. And you would never think about giving your baby or toddler a gun, a cigar, or a martini, or the keys to the car, and yet millions of people are giving their children these two-way microwave radios without realizing that they're putting them at risk.
Now, what is the exact risk for children and the impact on children?
Well, the risk for all of us is that microwave radios should not be held directly next to the brain or body. But for children in particular, because their skulls are thinner and their brains contain more fluid, they will absorb more microwave radiation than the rest of us. And we spend billions of dollars protecting the brains of our children with bike helmets and seat helmets and seat belts and all the things we do to protect our kids. We need to protect the developing brain, particularly from that kind of exposure, because evidence has mounted in laboratories, studies conducted at Yale University, published just this year by the distinguished chairman of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Hugh Taylor, showed that prenatal exposure to mice that were pregnant to cell phone radiation resulted in producing offspring that had damage to their brains and their behavior.
Now, what kind of damage would that translate if I were a parent and I didn't know better and I was exposed to that? What would I be looking in my newborn?
Well, they're talking about, in animals, there are various measures of hyperactivity, and there are indices for how you evaluate hyperactivity in animals. And so you know what a normal mouse behavior looks like, and you know what behavior looks like when it's altered. And they used these different indices of mouse behavior and found effects on the development of their brain and the way they acted. So in particular, they looked at the frequency of pyramidal neurons in mice, and these are neurons right in the brain that are pretty important, and saw a significant reduction in these. And they measured what's called synaptic efficacy of glutamatergic transmission, which boils down to how well does the nervous system work. And what they showed is basically you could impair the nervous transmission of information from one brain cell to another.
That sounds like Alzheimer's.
Well, it could be autism. It could be a whole bunch of things. We don't really have the research. And I think one of the things Environmental Health Trust is calling for is a major national research program. In the United States today, there is no ongoing studies of surveillance of our children for possible effects of cell phones or other wireless radiation on their brains and bodies. We have no studies underway at all. And aside from the recent report of Dr. Taylor and some work produced by Dr. Ashok Agarwal of the Cleveland Clinic in 2008, there's very little research underway in the United States on the question of how cell phone radiation and other wireless radiation affects our health, even though neurobehavioral disorders are growing in prevalence in children, and we have obviously a growth of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and earlier and earlier onset of Parkinson's that we cannot explain as well.
That's very interesting. Now, in terms, I'm going to ask you a question really that's rhetorical. Is there an industry conspiracy? And of course, I mean, why wouldn't there be? There's so much money involved.
You know, conspiracy implies a very tightly controlled thing, and I think it's more complicated than that. I think this is one of the fastest growing, most profitable, and most exciting industries in the world today. Cell phones have revolutionized our lives a lot for the better. So the idea that there may be some problems with how we use them is not something that people find very convenient. In fact, it's a highly inconvenient truth to think about the fact that fetal radiation, prenatal exposures to cell phones, has not ever been fully evaluated for its effect on children's health. It's very inconvenient to think about the fact that Sheryl Crow's brain tumor, not a cancer, a benign brain tumor, may well have been caused by her long-term use of cell phones. But those are the facts that we have to address. Those things are happening, and we need independent research. And one of the problems you have, you throw the question in of a conspiracy, is that there is almost no independently funded research in this field today. That's why we set up Environmental Health Trust. We are a small nonprofit actually doing studies. We are modeling exposure of the fetus and the young brain. We're seeing what happens to brain cells when they're exposed to cell phone radiation. And this obviously requires major funding at the level of the government.
When you wrote Disconnect, and I read the book, it seemed so obvious that there must be a connection. You know, sometimes when you hear the truth, it resonates for you without the scientific studies. It kind of set up that analogy or metaphor to X-rays. I remember when X-rays first came out, they were overused. I know people who had X-ray treatment for acne.
Yeah.
So why, after our experience, let's say, with X-rays and radiation, why is this, it's almost like, let me pun, a no-brainer?
You know, that's a really good one, Debbie.
Thank you.
I think you've answered the question by the way you've asked it. I mean, just X-rays, which I've written about in my other book, The Secret History of the War on Cancer, revolutionized the world. And within a year or two of their being discovered at the turn of the 20th century, there were already reports that people were getting damaged and early deaths from people who had too much exposure.
Well, I don't want to rush through this thought, but we have to go to commercial break.
Sure. And
we will return with Dr. Devra Davis, author of Disconnect.
Now you can take Debbie Mandel home with you. Her book, Turn On Your Inner Light, Fitness for Body, Mind, and Soul, will help you decompress with healthy, positive, concrete solutions. Common life challenges are presented so that you can quickly find the help you need. Emotional tips, original meditations, and a fun and easy-to-follow fitness workout for each mindset. This revolutionary new method will help you rewire mind and body to take back your power. Get it on Amazon.
Are you overwhelmed with the burden of taking care of children, parents, or both? Are you taking care of everyone else except yourself? It's time to change your habits and re-energize. Debbie Mandel gives you an innovative and easy-to-follow program for good health and happiness. In her magical new book, Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout, Debbie Mandel shows you step-by-step how to find the optimal balance between giving and receiving and guides you to exercise and eat right to take care of yourself. What are you waiting for? Read Changing Habits and start training for your life. Life does not need to be a burden. Get Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout on Amazon.
You're listening to the Turn On Your Inner Light show. I'm your host, Debbie Mandel, and I'm speaking with Dr. Devra Davis, author of Disconnect. Now, before commercial break, Deborah, we were talking about radiation from X-rays and the damage they did when they first came out. Would you continue?
Sure. And you asked a very brilliant question. Why are we so reluctant to understand there could be problems with cell phone radiation? And I said, as with X-rays, X-rays have positive value. If you have an unconscious person, you can do a X-ray or a CAT scan, and you can find out what to do, whether they need surgery, etc. But in the beginning, they were overused, and it wasn't until people started literally to die from the overuse of X-rays that it became there was an awareness of the problem. And the reality is X-rays can save lives, but they're used improperly. They actually can cause harm. It's taken us, unfortunately, some 60 years, maybe longer, to fully put that into play. And even now, there are warnings about the excessive use of X-rays and what it can do to our children and ourselves. The situation with cell phones is very different in one way. Everyone is using a cell phone now, and millions of children are using cell phones. So that even if the risk of using a cell phone for cancer, for example, is relatively small, there's no one who's not exposed. And the population effects could be huge. And because cell phones have so many positive values in our society, positive roles, they're used for education, for finding a restaurant, for guiding you around, people are very reluctant to think about the question of whether they need to be used in a safer way. And there's no question that they do. There's no question. In fact, one study indicated that about 90% of all use of cell phones is used by 10% of all people. The 90% who are using them for things like downloading games and porn and things like that. So, I'm sorry, the 90% of all use is being used by 10% of all people. From the industry point of view, you want to get the 10% that are using 90% of all to become the pattern for everybody else. So if you did that, you'd have much more growth of the business. If we do that without recognizing we have to use phones safely, we're going to be in big trouble. Because it turns out the evidence is growing that cell phone radiation can damage brain cells and cause serious effects on development. And that's not something we should take lightly, nor is it something that we should wait, as we have done with tobacco. We should not wait for 50 years until we have irrefutable evidence of harm. If we do that with cell phones, then we're basically saying to our children and grandchildren, look, we're going to conduct a little experiment on you, and when we're gone, you'll see what's happened.
Yes, and it sounds so nightmarish. So I'm asking you, why throughout the years, and you touched on it, have there been so many inconclusive studies? It seems so clear. There must be something sinister underlying
Well, I'll leave that to you and your listeners to decide, but I will just tell you this. Brain cancer is one of the hardest things we have to study in cancer epidemiology. Brain cancer in adults is thought to have a latency of 30 or 40 years. That is to say, from first exposure to when you get the cancer, it's thought to be 30 or 40 years on average. And we know that because when the bombs fell at the end of World War II at Hiroshima, there was no increase in brain cancer in the population that was exposed to ionizing radiation at all 10 years later, 20 years later. No increase in brain cancer. The increase in brain cancer from ionizing radiation showed up 40 years after the bombs fell at the end of World War II. So that's ionizing radiation. Cell phone radiation is not ionizing radiation, and it's very weak. And it's the pulsed digital nature of the signal that we think is highly problematic. Now, we are seeing some studies that have been done in heavy cell phone users defined as someone who made one and has been on the phone for half an hour a day for 10 years. That's a heavy user. Half an hour a day for 10 years, those people have doubled the risk of brain cancer in most studies that have been done on such users. And that shows up after 10 years. And so we are very concerned if you're seeing a risk of brain cancer in people after 10 years of use. What's going to happen 30 years later?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, is the risk, it looks like it's doubled after 10 years, it might be quadrupled after 30 or 40 years. If you study tobacco or asbestos and you ask, is there an increase in cancer 10 years after people start to smoke or are exposed to asbestos, the answer is there really is almost no detectable increase in risk.
Mm-hmm.
Now here with cell phone radiation, we are seeing an increase. And most recently, last week, Dr. Leonard Hardell published a study that found that people who started to use cell phones regularly before age 20, which of course is most of our young people today,
exactly, mm-hmm.
they have a 4 to 5-fold increased risk of brain cancer within 10 years. So that the starting to use a cell phone in your before age 20 as a teenager appears to give you even bigger risk of brain cancer.
It seems like the brain is still developing, we know.
Well,
that...
as a matter of fact, the mother of young men can tell you this, the brain of a teenager is continuing to grow, and into young adulthood, myelin, the protective fatty sheath that grows around our neurons, is not complete until the 20s, and it grows and completes more later in young men than young women. Myelin is thought to give us judgment and impulse control, and may explain why the car accident rate is higher for boys than girls. We don't really know, but what
impulsive
we do know is
behavior, yes.
That myelin is really important, and the unmyelinated neuron is going to be more vulnerable than the myelinated one. And of course, you've got the skull that protects you, and protects you from microwave radiation. The thinner the skull, the younger the child, the more the exposure. So what we put it all together and we realize this. Many studies of brain cancer and cell phones have been inconclusive. The majority of them have been. And the majority of the studies have followed people for less than 10 years. That's number one. In addition, in most studies done, they define a user of a cell phone as someone who makes one call a week for 6 months.
Oh, but...
Okay,
well,
and they studied old phones, not the current ones. So we're really in the midst of an experiment on ourselves.
Oh, and we're going to go to commercial break while we all ponder this horror. And we will return with Dr. Devra Davis, author of Disconnect. Dear listeners, I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Addicted to Stress. This is the message you need to hear. Are you addicted to stress? Do you do it all while everyone depends on you? Where's all this pressure coming from? It is coming from inside you. This is why my publisher, John Wiley, asked me to write Addicted to Stress, a woman's 7-step program to reclaim joy and spontaneity in life. This fun-to-read book teaches proven strategies to reclaim your life, silence your inner critic, build a healthy body, and reframe your thoughts to change your life for the better. Dare to be happy without the guilt. Addicted to Stress is easy to get. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other fine bookstores everywhere. You can also buy it at Amazon and other online retailers. We're back with Dr. Devra Davis, President of Environmental Health Trust and author of Disconnect. Okay, so let's say I have to sleep with the enemy, so to speak. How can I minimize my exposure, given that I can't give up my cell phone?
Well, one thing it's fascinating to see is that Samsung, which has now taken over as the top cell phone seller in the world, is making phones that actually do emit less radiation. Now, they're doing it because it increases battery life, because then you don't drain the battery as fast. But I think they also understand something, that is, people are going to demand safer phones, and a safer phone is one that emits less radiation and gives you the same performance. I think the industry is not the enemy, because the enemy is us. If we wanted to save ourselves from cell phone dangers, we could all just stop using them. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I think people generally are willing to take some risks There's no life without some risk. And what we have to do is work to encourage and demand the creation of safer products. I call this, by the way, part of a girl-caught strategy. Boycotts mean no, girl-cots mean yes. Mm-hmm. We demand the right to buy safer, healthier, greener, cleaner products. You see the facts of that emerging in the household cleaning department, where you can now buy things without perfumes and without pesticides for your soaps and cleaners in your home. The same thing is going to happen in the cell phone world, where companies are responding to the fact that people want safer products. And Apple is going to have to respond as well. Their products, some of their earlier products, were very high in radiation, and they understand that you can't continue to have people use these devices and keep them next to the body. The Apple iPhone 4S came with a warning that said if you keep it in your pocket, can exceed the FCC exposure guidelines. Of course, nobody reads the warning, but it's there so that 20 years from now their lawyers can say, well, we told you not to keep it in your pocket.
What will we do without the lawyers? And, you know, from your book, you made a case about infertility. Yes. And for men, we all know men shouldn't keep a laptop on their lap.
Nobody should keep a laptop on their lap, not just men. Laptops actually come also with warnings that say you're supposed to have a book or a desk on it. Laptops are really not meant to be held directly on the body for men or women. And certainly not for young children whose ovaries and reproductive organs are very vulnerable.
And our hormones. And I read research how the iPad, when you look at it at night, can mess up your biorhythms and you can't get to sleep.
There certainly is evidence of that. And the iPad comes with a proximity sensor because it wouldn't have been approved for use without this sensor that automatically reduces radiation when it's close to the body. Now, there's software that TalkOn makes, TAWKON, that can be downloaded to all phones except iPhones, and it tells you, blinks red light if you're having too much radiation coming out of the phone.
Oh, that's interesting.
So there are already responses in the market to this. There's a case being made by Pong that diffuses the radiation.
Oh.
So there really is evidence that there are ways to reduce exposure, and people are producing devices that you can put in your pocket. There are things that claims have been made for various chips that I've seen no independent proof that they work. But for the Pong case, I know that does diffuse the radiation coming out of most phones.
This is amazing. And of course, you can use an ear device, right? The
Absolutely.
earbuds.
We recommend using a headset. An earpiece. Do not keep the phone on your body, in your pocket. Use a speakerphone. And you can do something really radical. You can turn your phone off. Have it on when you really want to be interrupted.
I have to habituate to that.
Yeah. Or get in the habit of putting your phone on airplane mode all the time so that you can't get a call except when you really do want to be interrupted.
That might help us disconnect, by the way, from all the technology overload, and as in my field of stress management, what could be better than that? So I think we're really intersecting at disconnect. Now, could you quickly tell us if we want to access and learn more about your wonderful work?
We have a website, environmentalhealthtrust.org or ehtrust.org, that includes links to online lectures, supplies. We have safety cards. We're working on Long Island with a couple of universities that are promoting cell phone safety awareness in English and Spanish. We're working with teacher groups and physicians around the country. And for all of that, we have materials that are available as free resources on our website. We're rolling out a revamped website probably just about the time that this show will be airing. And we're always looking for people who want to volunteer or tell us what to do. Because the goal here is to make phones as safe as possible.
Well,
our motto is practice safe phone.
Well, thank you so much. Our time together has flown, so I will have to disconnect reluctantly.
Thank you, Debbie, so much.
Be well.
Bye.
Affirmation of the week. You can have what you want if you ask for it in an unselfish way. And now for the latest medical trends. Name-calling is a petty task for today's bully. Instead, they're preying on food-allergic children, stuffing peanut butter cookies in lockers, and turning bullying into a possible death-defying nightmare. Children who use inhaled steroid drugs for asthma end up slightly shorter at their full adult height than children who don't use these drugs. These are new results from comprehensive asthma studies. From the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, even though African American men in the U.S. are disproportionately more likely to have uncontrolled high blood pressure than other racial and ethnic groups, they are less likely to use health-preserving medication. We have to address that. Potentially worrisome weight gains following tonsillectomy occur mostly in children under the age of 6, not in older children, according to Johns Hopkins. And for people looking to combat wrinkles and sagging skin, oh my, resulting from sun-damaged smoking and the ravages of time, some doctors are offering an increasingly popular treatment, and they all rely on heat. From the Archives of Internal Medicine, acupuncture works to relieve pain and stress. Whether this is an actuality or it's the placebo effect, well, who cares as long as it works? Many people take medication or pills as the placebo effect. Well, we come to the close of another show. I have an educational website on stress management, totally free. TurnOnYourInnerLife.com. And all the radio shows with the guest experts are archived for your listening pleasure and to direct to your friends. Just click on the link and you go right into YouTube and you can hear it. Subscribe to my free newsletter at TurnOnYourInnerLife.com. You will have the latest radio show links emailed directly to you, along with a fresh new article on stress management and all the health tips I didn't even get a chance to say on radio because there's so many fully delineated at Turn On.